Let's bring in the expert to talk about it, professor at Harvard University and director of the Institute for Theory and Computation at Harvard. That's Dr. Avi Loeb. All right, so what information do you think that the president might release? I mean, what do you think is actually in those files?
Well, thanks for having me. President Trump is breaking new boundaries here, and that would be very exciting. What I expect at first, I mean, there probably will be several waves of release. The first one will involve videos, video files. We've seen some blurry videos in the past. They weren't very informative. My hope is that we will see something more consequential, interesting, intriguing, because if we see objects in the sky that we cannot fully understand, that the members of the Pentagon intelligence agencies cannot figure out, there are two possibilities. Either adversarial nations are using technologies that we are not aware of, or maybe we're dealing with something beyond this earth or non-human made objects, in which case we can learn about new technologies. You know, we keep launching rockets. That's what NASA does, where the fuel carries more mass than the payload. That's in order to overcome the pull of gravity of the Earth. However, if, for example, we had access to a negative mass, we had a way of producing an object with a negative mass, you attach it to the payload, if it has exactly the same mass and it's negative, then the total mass of this object is just zero, and then it doesn't feel any gravity. You can just give it a small push and it will escape from the Earth. So there are possibilities that, you know, of extending the technologies we've used in the past for maneuvering, for traveling, that we may not be aware of. So it's a learning experience. At the very minimum, it's important for national security if it's produced by humans, all these objects, the UFOs. But if we happen to find even 1 out of 1 million objects that was not produced by humans and is technological, it would be the biggest discovery of human history. And President Trump will go down in history as the person who allowed the scientific community to learn that.
So, you know, it used to be that people were embarrassed to say, I saw something in the sky. I didn't know what it was. It was a UFO. And they would keep it to themselves. Now you got airline pilots, Navy and Air Force pilots shooting this video saying, I don't know what the heck that was. So it's becoming much more mainstream. We have a congressman, Tim Burchett, who said, well, this is what he said.
When I've been briefed by government officials, video, pictures, some of the best trained pilots in the world have described having close collisions with some sort of aircraft or apparatus. And so I think it's time that they come clean. I don't know if it's about little green men or flying saucers, Mr. Morgan, but I do think it's about disclosure. It's about transparency.
So that's the thing. I mean, we equate UFOs with, like he said, the little green men or something like that. And must that be the case or no?
No, not necessarily, especially if we're dealing with objects that travel interstellar distances. You know, it takes a long time, and anything to do with biological pilots makes no sense. You would expect technological probes that have artificial intelligence. And you know what Albert Einstein said is that if you want your kids to be intelligent, you tell them fairy tales. And if you want them to be even more intelligent, you tell them more fairy tales. So as far as we are concerned, you know, we are probably not at the top of the food chain, cosmologically speaking, because there are 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And we should treat it as a learning experience, whether any of our neighbors are visiting us. And if they do, we can learn about new technologies, new science, well beyond what we possess right now, because we benefited only from 1 century of modern science and technology. And look what we have now, artificial intelligence, again, another frontier pioneered by the Trump administration. But this discovery could be even more consequential to the future of humanity.
And I know plenty of people who paid, I don't know what it was, to have a star named after somebody, but that's a whole other story. You know, Jack Nicholson, right, when he said, you can't handle the truth. If the government has this information, and look, I'm among many that think the government has a lot of information that they're not telling for a variety of reasons, but is it because they think we can't handle the truth?
I don't think that's a good reason, because
Okay.
if you find a tennis ball in the backyard of your home and then you sit at dinner with your family members, you will surely tell them that there might be a resident on your street who threw this tennis ball, because this resident might show up at the front door at some point or affect their life in other ways. And so it makes no sense to hide this fact from your family members. And, you know, we are all in the same boat, and the government has other responsibilities, especially national security. You know, the Pentagon, the intelligence agencies have to worry about objects produced by adversarial nations. So it's really not their duty to worry what's outside the solar system. That's my day job. And I will be delighted to help the Trump administration figure out what these objects are. It's unclear whether the most intriguing data will be released in the first wave. You know, there must be some data from satellites and other sources that we cannot release because it was obtained by classified sensors. And we don't want our adversarial nations to be aware of our capabilities. But nevertheless, if there is something there, we should all know about it. And I will be the first, you know, to respond. You know, President Trump has me at hello if he wants me to help in figuring things out.
All right, real quick, because you are not a kook. You are a very smart man, and that's why we bring you on, because we really do value your opinion. Do you believe that there is evidence of a non-human alien life form or something that the government has in its possession?
I don't know. I have to see the evidence before telling you. I'm completely, I was never exposed to that evidence, and therefore I have no idea. And if they do have it, that would be remarkable. You know, it would make my life worth living. And I'm sure for a whole generation, it will inspire humanity to do better. It will change our priorities. I think it will bring us to a better place. And it's just like realizing that you have a sibling and it may be more accomplished than we are.
Dr. Loeb, always great to have you. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
All right.